These sessions are based on the book The Messiah Codes Unsealed.
Hello, once again, this is Luis. Welcome to the Messiah Codes. Today we're going over session 47, the third temple and how the future of prophecy is about to unfold before our eyes, part 4. This series is an addendum to sessions 8 through 11, which are a deep dive into the third temple biblical history and prophecy. You may want to watch those first. There you will see how the Lord left enough information so that we can calculate when the third temple will be dedicated. Today, we continue our journey into one of the most extraordinary and controversial prophecies in Scripture, the dedication of the third temple in the year 2030. Again, if you want an in-depth historical and prophetic analysis on the subject of the third temple, review sessions 8 through 11. There's some math involved, but nothing complicated. In this session, we'll examine the scenarios that could open the way for Israel to rebuild the temple on Mount Moriah and why prophecy suggests it would become reality within just a few years. This isn't speculation or guesswork, it is a result of careful biblical data modeling across multiple prophecies. Whether coming from the prophecy in Genesis 6:3, Leviticus 26, Ezekiel 4, or the last 2,000 years of the 6,000 year countdown, they all lead to the third temple's dedication in the year 2030. Remember that the 6,000 years go first from the fall to the birth of Abraham, exactly 2,000 years, from the birth of Abraham to the birth of Jesus, exactly 2,000 years, and from the death of Jesus to the third temple, we get exactly 2,000 years. Why the calculation for the third 2,000 year segment begins at Jesus' death and not his birth is explained in depth in the series God 6,000 Years Countdown. That is session 12, 13, and 14. What follows is a scenario analysis outlining possible events that could create the conditions necessary for the dedication of the third temple in the year 2030. Since these scenarios represent my own interpretation, I encourage you to approach them, again, with caution and discernment. In part 2 and 3 of this series, we presented 3 possible scenarios for the construction of the third temple on the Temple Mount, given that the Temple Mount is currently controlled by the Jordan. Since I know that some people will listen to this session without listening to the previous sessions, let me do a quick description of the 3 scenarios. The first scenario, the Israelis forcibly build the temple somewhere in the Temple Mount in defiance of the Muslim world, whether opportunistically, like taking advantage of a natural disaster, or through other circumstances. Second scenario, the third temple is built in another place. And the third scenario is the Israelis are invited to build the third temple somewhere on the Temple Mount. So let's do a quick recap of the first scenario. It is when, for any reason, the structure of the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque are damaged or destroyed, and the Israelis forcibly build the temple in the Temple Mount in defiance of the Muslims, because they wouldn't allow, to have the Israelis forcibly build the temple, right? Whether this happens opportunistically, like if there's an earthquake and the structure crumbles, and Israelis simply build over the falling structures, or under any other circumstance where the Dome of the Rock or the Al-Aqsa Mosque are destroyed and the Israelis take over the Temple Mount. This scenario is a non-starter. The forcible taking of the Temple Mount will cause a dystopian war future where the third temple would be under a constant threat, and for any practical purposes would not be able to function as the temple. If any event, natural or man-made, would destroy the Dome of the Rock, the Sunnis would rebuild it more majestic than it is now. The second scenario is the Israelis building the third temple in a different place. That scenario does not work because it is in the threshing floor of Ornan, the rock of Moriah, on the Temple Mount where Abraham almost sacrificed Isaac, and where later God instructed David to build there an altar to the Lord and offered burnt offerings and peace offerings after David sinned by counting the people, basically counting the armies instead of trusting God. The Temple Mount is the place where the first and the second temples were built. It's exactly the place where the Temple of Jupiter was built about 50 years after the Second Temple's destruction, preserving its location, and where later the Dome of the Rock was built over Jupiter's temple. It's also where the Temple Institute directs that the third temple should be built. So, to build a temple on a place other than the Temple Mount is very unlikely. Then there is the third scenario. This is the most likely scenario. Under this scenario, the Israelis are invited or allowed to build the third temple somewhere in the Temple Mount as a humanitarian gesture by the Sunni world, as a response to a horrible event suffered by the Israelis, likely by jihadist extremists. That event is likely a huge explosion like a crude tactical nuke, creating the conditions that will convince the Sunni world to allow the Israelis to build the third temple on the Temple Mount. There are two versions of this third scenario, right? Version A and version B, very original. Well, first, let me clarify what I mean when I say a lone wolf, okay? By it, I refer to the delivery of the nuclear device by one person or a very small group of people, or an AI-controlled drone, for instance, a smart drone. Behind the lone wolf, there will be likely an organization or a group of organizations that will facilitate the creation of a crude nuclear device. Now, version A, which is a lone wolf attack against Israel under the normal tensions in the region, was studied in session 46. Today we will study version B, a lone wolf attack against Israel in the midst of an invasion of the Golan Heights. This is maybe the more intriguing version. That scenario entails an attack from an extremist group concealed by a larger regional conflict that includes the invasion of the Golan Heights. It calls specifically for an invasion of the Golan Heights by an international coalition led by Syria and close allies, fueled by Syria's attempt to regain control over the large oil reserves discovered in the Golan Heights. That scenario, namely the taking of the Golan Heights for treasure, meaning oil, began thousands of years ago with a promise that God gave Jacob and the children of Israel. We read in Deuteronomy 32:13, He, God, made him, Jacob, ride in the heights of the earth, that he might eat the produce of the field. He made him draw honey from the rock and oil from the flinty rock. In 1967, during the Six-Day War, Israel battles Syria on the Golan Heights and wins the battle, securing the Golan Heights as a buffer between Syria and Israel, and annex it to Israel's territory. The 1967 ceasefire line on the Golan Heights is known as the Purple Line. It separates Syria from Israel, as you can see in the map. During the 1973 Arab-Israeli War, the Syrian army crossed the 1967 ceasefire line, winning back some territory. But in a counterattack, the Israeli Defense Forces recaptured the lost territory and advanced beyond the 1967 ceasefire line, occupying an even larger portion of the Golan Heights. Then, on December 17, 1981, the United Nations Security Council Resolution 497 was adopted unanimously and declared null and void and without international legal effect the Israeli Golan Heights Law, which annexed the Golan Heights to Israel, and further called on Israel to rescind that action. In 2013, AFEC Oil and Gas, an Israeli subsidiary of New Jersey-based Genie Energy, was granted a license to drill exploration oil wells in an area that covers about 1/3 of the Golan Heights. Environmental issues delayed the drilling until a December of 2014 ruling that gave AFEC Oil the green light to start drilling. On December of 2015, Yuval Bartov, the chief geologist of AFEC Oil, in an interview with Israel's Channel 2, explained that the company found a vast amount of oil in the Golan Heights. In that interview, he said, we're talking about a strata which is 350 meters thick. And what is important is the thickness and the porosity. On average, in the world, strata are 20 to 30 meters thick. So this is 10 times as large as that. So we're talking about a significant quantities of oil. And he continued, the important thing is to know the oil is in the rock. And that's what we know now. Like the Lord said, an oil from the flinty rock. What a prophecy. As of September of 2025, there has been only a handful of geological studies and reports published since 2016. And they only touch on the hydrocarbon potential, geothermal anomalies, and subsurface structures in the Golan Heights. But they do not confirm or expand significantly on the 2015 AFEC oil announcement of vast amounts of oil. The oil reserves in the Golan Heights are estimated at potentially billions of barrels of oil. The silence is more than justified since this is an extremely touchy subject. Let's see, vast amounts of oil in a territory controlled by Israel, but recognized by the international community as part of Syria. What could possibly go wrong? In March of 2019, President Donald Trump, in what could be called a biblical statement, made a proclamation recognizing Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights, a decision regretted by most of the UN Security Council. The president wrote in a tweet, "After 52 years, it is time for the United States to fully recognize Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights, which is a critical strategic and security importance to the state of Israel and regional stability." That proclamation reverses the position previous US administrations held for decades. Now, let me start framing the origins of the regional conflict that could conceal the extremist group move to deliver and detonate a strategic nuclear device or its equivalent in Israel. 9 months after President Trump's proclamation, on December of 2019, in a joint statement at the international meeting on the subject of Syria's territory sovereignty held in Kazakhstan, an accord named the Astana Format was signed. It affirmed the territorial sovereignty of Syria over all its territory, including the Golan Heights. 3 countries signed as guarantors of the Astana Format, and therefore also guarantors of Syria's sovereign power over the whole Golan Heights. Guess which countries signed the accord affirming the territorial sovereignty of Syria? The Islamic Republic of Iran, Biblical Persia, the Russian Federation, Biblical Rosh, and the Republic of Turkey, Biblical Gomer and Togarma. The joint statement says that it reaffirms the strong commitment to the sovereignty, independence, unity, and territorial integrity of the Syrian Arab Republic, as well as to the purposes and principles of the UN Charter, and highlighted that these principles should be universally respected and complied with. In November 30, 2022, the UN General Assembly adopted with 92 votes in favor, 9 against, and 65 abstentions a resolution declaring that Israel has failed to comply with Security Council Resolution 497 of 1981. That resolution declared that Israel's decision to impose its laws, jurisdiction, and administration on the occupied Syrian Golan Heights is null and void, and demanded that Israel rescinds this annexation action. The Israeli Golan Heights law imposed Israel's law, jurisdiction, and administration on what the UN refers to as the occupied Syrian Golan Heights. The Syrian civil war, which began in 2011, has caused a catastrophic collapse of the country's economy and quality of life. That reality will play a key role in the development that will trigger the events contemplated in version B of this third scenario. Over a decade of conflict has decimated infrastructure, led to widespread poverty, mass displacement, and the breakdown of essential services like healthcare, education, and sanitation. The poverty rate has surged from 33% before the conflict to over 90% in 2024. And extreme poverty affected just 11% of Syrians pre-conflict, but rose to an estimated 66% by early 2025. Approximately 70% of the population, 16.7 million people, required humanitarian assistance in 2024. The Syrian pound lost over 99.5% of its value since 2011, fueling hyperinflation and making basic goods unaffordable for most Syrians. Syria's gross domestic product plummeted by over 80% in real terms between 2011 and 2023. One 2025 World Bank report estimates that the economy has contracted by 83% since 2010. In early 2025, 14.5 million Syrians were food insecure, with over 9 million experiencing acute food insecurity. Child malnutrition rates have nearly tripled since 2019, and while malnutrition among pregnant and breastfeeding women is also on the rise. Due to funding shortfalls, the World Food Programme was forced to cut its assistance by 80% in 2024. In addition to the direct casualties of conflict, the collapse of services has contributed to many deaths. The war has also left an entire generation of children experiencing profound psychological distress. In short, Syria is an economic disaster where the civilian population, and especially the most vulnerable, the children, are at most risk. However, access to the extensive oil reserves found in the Golan Heights, in what Syria calls an occupied territory, and what the United Nations recognizes as Syria's territory, would be a short-term economic respite and a mid to long-term solution to most of Syria's economic problems. The value of those oil reserves create a very strong incentive to take back that territory. Currently, that is an impossibility, as the Israeli army will stop in its track any incursion from Syria to gain back the Israeli part of the Golan Heights. However, if Syria preemptively organizes a well-orchestrated marketing strategy, showing the world how the return of the Golan Heights, as it is, and its riches, right, could stop Syrians, especially the children, from dying for lack of food and health care, could stop its population from migrating to the West, and could bring prosperity to a country battered by conflict. Using a smart worldwide campaign, they may garner the necessary international support to regain the lost territory through the use of an international coalition that could secure a peaceful, quote-unquote, transition of the Golan Heights from Israel to Syrian hands. The idea of a peaceful international coalition led by regional players, such as the guarantors of the Astana format, which could give, if needed, logistical and economic support to such peaceful Syrian incursion, is not only astute, but also logical. The proposition becomes very attractive to those leading the international coalition with boots on the ground if they expect to be rewarded with, among other things, access to the vast oil reserves in the Golan Heights at deeply discounted prices as repayment for their effort. Remember, who are the signatories of the Astana format guaranteeing the territorial integrity of Syria? Iran, Russia, and Turkey. And Iran and Russia have the experience and expertise to get oil production in the Golan Heights started as soon as possible. The logic behind an international peaceful quote-unquote incursion retaking the Golan Heights poses the following questions, right? What will Israel do if it sees an invasion of the Golan Heights by a peaceful international coalition, again, quote-unquote, when the Golan Heights are recognized by the international community as legally part of Syria? How would Israel defend against an incursion by a peaceful international coalition over a territory that the UN calls Israeli illegally obtained territory? The Israeli army is mighty for sure, and again, would deal with the Syrian army with ease. But a peaceful international coalition of the willing entering the Golan Heights in the name of solidarity with the struggling and dying Syrian population, to retake what the international community recognizes as territory illegally kept by Israel will be much greater challenge than a powerful army, especially after the current international pushback against Israel for their Gaza offensive. What would Israel do? Shoot peaceful armies from many countries? Notwithstanding current tensions between the signatories of the Astana format, between themselves, what would happen if the signatories of the accord to protect Syria's territorial integrity were offered rich rewards, treasure, and booty in exchange for their support for this peaceful coalition of the willing, all within the United Nations law and tacit approval, right? Not to mention the enticing opportunity to humiliate Israel. That is, in short, version B of the third scenario, which could lead to the dedication of the third temple in 2030 on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. Does version B of the invasion of the Golan Heights describe the Gog and Magog war? In part 5, we will study version B in more detail. And on part 6, on this series, we will compare this scenario and see how well it matches Ezekiel 38 and 39 and Isaiah 17. See you in the next session.